warm welcome, Dr. Maya John. Thank you for taking out your time to be on this channel, Kahanis Golden Bytes. It's a pleasure to have you on the channel. Thank you so much for taking out your time.
I thank you for the opportunity to interact with your viewership.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, for the benefit of our viewers, could you just give a little bit of your background, what you're doing currently, so that our viewers get to know a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'd like to start with perhaps what I think is a useful biographical sketch. I come from a family of educationalists, so I've had that exposure and set of opportunities with me. They've shaped me, who I am. So, both from my side of my father's family and my mother's side of the family, there have been, teachers and, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, Professor V.V. John, was even the Vice Chancellor of Jai Narayan Vyas University in Jodhpur, Rajasthan. He also was a member of the Minorities Commission in the 70s. And I think just watching, and he was a prolific writer. Plato's Republic is one of his very well-known books. So I watched, I was very young, but I watched and I heard subsequent conversations amongst family members about their intervention, and including my maternal grandfather. And so I think, that of course created an ambience for me when growing up, that, education was taken seriously, and, we were given our chance to pursue the kind of education that we wanted to as women. So that privilege, of course, brought me to St. Stephen's College in the early 2000s, where I was studying history honors. And very soon, within the first year of college itself, there were certain inequalities in that space, Very soon we realized that this, hallowed realm of, the elite institution was not actually based on equality. And, we didn't have, for example, a crucial infrastructure like a hostel for women students coming from different parts of the country, having to, struggle and live outside in expensive places. So I think I started my, journey with student activism there way back in college itself. It again shaped me, taught me a lot on, leadership skills, team effort, the importance of, being part of movements and grassroots struggles. And, I remember when I was in third year, a lot of, the kind of struggle we've been doing, not just for, hostel facility for women students in our own college, but also in other co-ed colleges and all women's colleges. It was also a struggle for safer neighborhoods, safer streets, safer public places. So, from that experience, many of us felt that we could contest for student elections in college. So in 2005, the group of women students and men students in college decided that I should compete for the student union elections of St. Stephen's College. So I went on to become the first woman president in St. Stephen's, and 2005 to 2006, I was the president. Again, an experience which taught me a lot. It was not easy. There was a lot of institutional bias. And very quickly, from that, period of my life, I was taught, struggles for, equality within one's own family, equality within one's own educational institution, soon spilled over to a concern. And I was dragged into this wider, movement and circle of people who were talking about the larger deprivation in our society, talking about sections of women and even men in our society who are less privileged than even us. So, it then shaped me and brought me close to the wider trade union movement in India. So I'm currently, associated with and assisting unions of, the lowest segments of our job market. So this would be, domestic workers, paid domestic workers in Delhi NCR region. Of course, I also work with other sections of, women in the workforce, such as nurses, teachers. I'm a teacher myself. I teach history in Jesus and Mary College.
Well, that was just, lovely to hear this background. There's so much of information. It was really, really rich. And so, Maya, you're involved at the grassroots level, and in a very, very broad sense. You're involved with different associations and unions, etc., as well as you're working with the youth in terms of as a professor in a college. So, do you think the way, say, boys and girls or men or women in the education space as a student in the student environment, uh, they're treated differently? Should that undergo a change? What is your opinion on that in terms of, you know, under the assumption that it plays an important role in the years ahead as they grow older into more important positions or with more responsibility? Do you think that plays a, sorry?
True. I think our existing education system needs a major overhaul. And this is not because I'm also within the system and I work within this education system, albeit the higher education sector. But I know that there is an inherent problem which exists and that perpetuates, that nurtures not just gender inequality, but it's nurturing a lot of other inequalities, you know. And what's happening is it's almost, it's a very, if you look at it, actually, it's a very simple picture in the sense that given, circumstances, family backgrounds, resources, right from the school level, we see, our youth having access to different kinds of education. So somebody goes to a, very rich, very big private school, and somebody, depends on the, neighborhood government school. In Delhi, we call them Sarvodaya Vidyalayas. They're run down, badly managed, And from there starts this, journey of whether you'll even get into college, So then exclusion is a long journey of exclusion. And by the time you come into the level of college, I very often call it ki bahut baar, if I can just mention it in Hindi and I'll explain
Sure,
in English.
absolutely.
बहुत बार 12वीं के बाद भारत के एक बड़े हिस्से लड़कियों के और लड़कों का 13वीं हो जाता है. In the sense that, you pass class 12 somehow, but a very large section don't get to college, And, the sad situation is therefore that, the kind of institutions of higher education we have, a very small segment is coming into formal education. And within those educational institutions as well, there is a hierarchy. There are certain colleges, certain universities run by the government, which get more funding, others get less funding. And, now we're seeing a system where there is this ranking, it's called the NIRF ranking and also known as the NAC ranking. And they are going to determine, especially under the new education policy that's been, officially adopted by the current government, it's going to, lead us to a situation that your ranking, defines your funding and whether you're going to even exist as an institution in the next 15 years. So, we're looking at these kind of situations where the facilities and infrastructure is limited and is going to perhaps reduce even further. And a large section is going to be pushed into what is called as open and distance learning, online learning modes, etc. This is very dangerous. It's going to perpetuate inequality because, please, in the last few months due to the pandemic, we've been teaching online, being forced to teach online. And it's the kind of, problems that people, a large number of students are facing. They're dependent on a, small smartphone, and you have to realize that that's where the gender inequality and dynamics will play themselves out. That's where the class inequality will play themselves out. In poorer households, you have 2 children or 3 children, struggling with one smartphone to attend their classes. You have, the girl child in many households finding it difficult to, recharge the internet pack. So we've seen all that. And, we have, therefore, a situation where our education system is to provide more rather than, opting for these, modules which are easy and, allow the system to withdraw from its responsibilities rather than investing more in education and providing proper infrastructure. So I, think that, yes, a lot needs to change our education system. Many more need to be provided formal education, quality education that is, funded by the government, And that's why I think successive governments have failed in, giving the actual necessary resources, galvanizing the resources required for education's development, for making it a mass education program. And they've allowed this dual mode of education to exist where you have a private and a government, systems functioning. And the poor always end up dependent on the government system. And when it comes to higher education, then interestingly, they're the ones who are shunted out. And that includes a very large number of women, a very large number of youth from the Dalit community, includes a very large number of youth from the minorities, who then, though being products of government schooling, are the first ones to be cut off. That's what our cut-off system in universities is. Cut off from the creme de la creme government-funded universities and colleges, and are told, go and study in private, or go and study in open and distance learning mode, or do something like that, or start working. So it's an irony that then it's only a certain section of the more better households that studied in the private schooling system then end up taking the admission and taking the resources when it comes to higher education. So that also needs to change. And I think that way it will also change the life trajectories of so many more women, in this age group of 15 to 18, okay? Because, I've also worked in places, such as Haryana, I can give you an example, where literally, for the past few years with the successive Haryana governments curbing, funds for schools and closing down the upper primary and the secondary schools in many, districts, which means that, girls, when they reach the certain age of 13, 14, have to travel even longer distances if they want to continue to class 9, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So we actually had girls in many villages sitting on protest, and asking that the school be not shut down and that they be allowed to study in their neighborhood or in their village school. So, I mean, this is the India we're seeing, today, and these are the struggles that we need to strengthen, I feel.
So, Maya, what do you see in terms of, I mean, the challenges you've mentioned are huge, are big. They've been, some of them have been coming on, they're taking a different shape and form within every few years and in different regions. So in a country like India, with changes and so much of diversity right across, social strata right across in different segments, we can cut it in different ways. So how, going forward, what do you think could be done to that section? So in the sense I'm trying to figure out, women leaders, we keep talking about, they join the workforce, the women workforce, and we're talking about women leadership. Europe is going in a certain direction in terms of legislation, in terms of, people on the board, etc. US has a very different view. When it comes to legislation, etc., successive governments keep making changes. What do you think they can do given this environment? Given what you've stated and the challenges that are there, the challenges exist, and not one of them is small. What do you think the government could do, because if they're being shunted out, what do you think they should be concentrating on or could take a look at in terms of, one is trying to address all these different segments. But if I would, just look at women, the girl child and the women workforce later on, what do you think they can be doing to address some of this? Because the challenges seem very big.
I think the experience on the ground has taught us that, different regimes in India, sometimes even regimes led by women leaders. We've had women chief ministers, we've had women MLAs, MPs, prime minister. But fundamentally, the average woman's life, has not substantially changed since 1947. I'm also a historian. I'm trained in history. So, this is also an unfortunate reality of the nation in its making, that so many inequalities, as you're saying, and social stratification has remained and in fact got reinforced, in the decades that in the past few decades since 1947. So, the point is that, typically, regime after regime comes and offers a few piecemeal kind of, solutions. So we often see like these laws that are introduced, legislations which are introduced, and specifically, targeting certain gender inequality in the workplace, for example. Let me focus on, working women. Um, and the problem is that, most of the legislation that is coming, uh, I'd like to say that, on one hand, the government brings in certain kind of legislation. I'll come back to the question of what are the problems with the legislation. But on one hand, it comes up with this kind of legislation, which, is supposed to defend women in their workplaces, their rights in the workplaces. But at the same time, this is the successive regimes, successive governments has come. And there is a crisis of employment in the sense that, there is, no concerted effort or consistent effort to provide women gainful employment. Now, I'm not talking in the 18th century. I'm not talking in the 31st century. I'm talking in today's 21st century. And if you look around you in your own cities where we work and live, so many women are, working in jobs which are underpaid. They are caught in a cycle of debt, or they are unemployed. I mean, there's periodic unemployment of women. And of course, the large number, therefore, that is, caught within the four walls of their home, so-called home. Many homes are so violent, one doesn't even want to call them homes. And the point is that, therefore, a very important part of any government policy, any regime is to enhance employment, gainful employment of women. And it's very important because more women who come out into the public domain, into workplaces, also means greater democratization of that society. It also paves the way for at least those, those circumstances, the potential for more gender inequality, albeit through struggle, through tussle, to materialize. So women, I always say this, it's difficult for women to unite across the four walls of their house. There are all these dynamics of who's Sas and who's Bahu. But women in their workplace, women in their educational institution as students, they can still forge solidarities. They can forge networks and, create more awareness and sensitivity and struggles, actual struggles and movements for change. In the way society perpetuates inequality, discrimination, etc. So that is one concern I have. So that's why I see contradictions, actually. On one hand, you see these piecemeal legislations coming, like, prohibition of sexual harassment of women in the workplace. And it's, the same context you have, like, as I said, women in their, not getting jobs, not getting employed, or if they are being employed, then being paid dirt cheap, Now, I always say that if you're exploiting in the workplace on the basis of wages, work hours, whether the person is going to be employed on a proper contract or it's just like this informal contract you can hire and fire at will, then obviously that also breeds the ground for sexual harassment. The more the insecure the work contract, more insecure the workplace, the more vulnerable the woman is. And the more she's going to be dependent on a middleman or a contractor for her employment, the more she's going to be a victim of his lust. So I would just say that things go hand in hand, and therefore more gainful employment is very necessary for us to even democratize workplaces and for women to come out of the home and push society to actually fundamentally change. So I think some important economic policies need to be revisited in terms of, successive governments. Just a quick word more about legislation. I pointed one important legislation which is often quoted, especially when it comes to women in the workplace. And I just mentioned the name of that law. It's called Sexual Harassment at the Workplace: Prevention, Prohibition, and Redressal, and was enforced. As an activist, many of us were alarmed, and we looked more closely at the provisions of that act. I request all working women to read the provisions of that act very carefully. 2013 Act, Sexual Harassment at the Workplace. It's a nominated committee. That means, the employer nominates who's on the committee. And I immediately think that, why so much power to one person? Increasingly, the state, and this is happening all over the world, Joby. It's not just happening in India. All over the world, we've seen this, that increasingly, more modern states of the 20th, 21st century have pushed towards a kind of, industrial and labor relations framework where the employer's power is gaining more. So it's like, rather than the state intervening in, matters of conflict, it is left to an employer-employee private relation, okay? And so there should be no intervention. So again, if it's sexual harassment, let the employer nominate a committee and tackle it at the workplace level.
Dr. Maya John, thank you for your time. There's a lot that you've shared, and I could carry on because this was very interesting, and we could have carried on this topic, such an important one. I'm hoping that you will come back once again on this channel at a later time and a later date. Thank you so much, Dr.
As I said, thank you for the opportunity.